We're going to be taking a look at Matthew chapter 9, verses 9 through 13. So if you wanted to turn there just to make sure that when I read it, it's what it actually says. So we learned that lesson from the Bereans in Sabbath school class this morning. We want to make sure that we're taking a look and making sure it says what it says. So I'm amazed today at what kinds of things and what kinds of people that you can get to come to your house to provide services for you. So I've heard about in the olden days some things that happened, but I've come to realize I just recently purchased a new vehicle. So reliability of a vehicle has been an issue of mine for multiple years. And so because reliability of my vehicles has been an issue for so many years, I have a best friend who is a mechanic. So if you don't have cars that run, you need to make a friend with a mechanic. And so what my mechanic friend does is that he will come to wherever my car is broke down and help me to try to fix it. So I would say he'd come to my house or whatever, but that's just not true. My car breaks down at more places than just my house. And so I give him a call. He meets me at the place where it is. And a lot of times it's something as simple that could be fixed, either a part or something's come loose or whatever has happened, and he's able to fix my car. So he's this mobile mechanic who will come to me whenever I have a need and need that to happen. So that's pretty helpful because normally what happens is that if your car breaks down, you have to call a tow truck to have it taken from wherever it's broken down all the way into a garage, and then you have to wait for however long it takes for him to fix the car and get it all finished, and then you have to come and figure out. And so here's my guy. He comes to me. He fixes the car, and then I get to go on my way. And he does it all within the course generally of a day or less. And that's a fantastic service that he has. But there's other people that will come to your house, specifically if you're interested in trying to buy things or do improvements on your house. So no one tries to give you an estimate for your roof in an office somewhere, do they? They all want to come and see exactly what's going on at the house and do it. Same is true for HVAC work or any other kinds of repairs that are going on. But in speaking with some older folks than me, I remember that there used to be a time, or they were telling me that there used to be a time, where doctors would actually come to your house. So now Shay was explaining to me that this is making a little bit of a comeback in some cases. What did you call it? Black bag, right? So, but I don't have it in my fancy schmancy neighborhood. So, but doesn't it make sense that doctors should come to your house rather than you go there? So what's the last thing you want to do when you're feeling really sick? It's get up and go out, right? And so what are you doing when you get up and go out too? How many people are you going to come into contact with? Like everybody, right? And you're going to get them all sick, right? And even if you're not that sick, guess who else is at the doctor's office? Other sick people, absolutely. It's fantastic. And so if you aren't sick already, you're pretty much guaranteed to be sick when someone coughs or hacks on you at the doctor's office. And so this idea of a doctor coming to your house in order to diagnose or treat you is a pretty fantastic idea. So a lot's been said in the last few years about healthcare reform. I know we probably all have an opinion on it, how our insurance has changed or what's gotten better or not as good. So, but what if a doctor came into a room to see you? He had terrible bedside manner. He was disgusted by your illness and he refused to treat you. He sent you to another doctor and then charged you $10,000 for your visit. Would you ever go to that doctor again? The answer is no. But that's exactly what we do with people in church sometimes. Churches say that they want to reach young families, but they have no church website. They advertise and invite people to come as they are, and then no one talks to them, and they expect them to follow our invisible rule book. You guys familiar with the invisible rule book? So it's the rule book that we all know exists because we've been with each other for so long that we don't have written down. And someone can walk in and break that rule book. So by what they're wearing or what they're doing, but yet we invite people to come exactly as they are. But then we expect them unconsciously to change to what our expectations are. without ever explaining anything, we do this. So we get upset when we say that we want young families and kids come into church and they are loud and they mess things up. So I saw a picture, a meme on Facebook this week that had a house that was all disastrous or whatever, and I think it had experienced a hurricane that had gone through it, and then they showed a picture of a house that had had children without picking up their toys for 3 days, and it looked roughly the same. And so when you have kids and you want kids to be around, they're going to make a mess. They're not going to know what to do. They're going to misbehave. That's what kids do. They're going to not know what the rules are. And even if they do know what the rules, you know what kids are good at? Testing the rules. They want to make sure that you're going to keep the rules that you have set down for them. So, but if you were a young family and you experienced this kind of stuff, would you want to come back to church? And the answer to that is also probably no. It would probably be uncomfortable. We wouldn't want to have that kind of judgment or experience upon us. So, an effective hospital is one that has patients lined up and out the door with folks who know they are getting the best care. So in the city where I live, there are 2 major health hospital systems, and you have your favorite. You choose one or the other, and it's all based upon your experience there with either the doctors or with the hospital itself. And so you've chosen to go there. As a matter of fact, I remember my dad growing up, he was a Vietnam veteran, and he said, take me anywhere but the VA hospital, because he's familiar with the kind of care that they get there. And he doesn't want to receive that. He wants to get the best care that he can. When you're sick, you want to be paid attention to and treated. So as an effective church, like an effective hospital, is one who has people that are visiting, staying, growing, and making a mess. Because growing up in Christ, just like growing up in life, can be messy. So if you can think about it, infants, they're pretty much only good at a few things: crying and pooping. It's what they like to do, and it's what they're good at. And so they make a mess. So, and even after they eat, they throw up all over you. It's just what the par for the course is, right? But as they grow up, it doesn't get much better. I mean, as they learn how to walk around, all they do is knock things over. They spill things all the time. You got stains everywhere in your house. It's messy. And then you think, sure enough, they're going to be able to learn to do things by themselves. They get into teenage years, and a lot of times they grow up physically faster than they're able to handle their bodies, and they trip over themselves and fall down. They're awkward, gangly, socially awkward. They don't know what to do. And I can tell you, even as an adult, sometimes you still don't know what to do. So even in your prime years like this, all I have looked forward to is regressing back into all those other stages. That's what I have to look forward to. And so just like that, life in Christ is messy, just like it is in real life. And so today, what I want to do is I want to take a look at the call of Matthew in Matthew 9, verses 9 through 13. And I want to remind us that the sick are the ones who need the physician, not the ones who are well. That the church is not for its members, but for those who need Jesus. And I want to tell us a story. I want us to see a story here today about 2 different doctors who are going to give 2 different diagnoses. So if we're familiar with that and we want to play the healthcare system out, we know well that we go to a doctor and we get one diagnosis. And sometimes we don't like what we hear. And we want another opinion. And so we go get a second opinion from another doctor, especially if the first one doesn't treat us well or doesn't look at us properly. And so here I'm going to show 2 doctors in our passage today, Dr. Pharisee and Dr. Jesus. So Matthew 9, verses 9 through 13. And I'm reading English Standard Version. It says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man called Matthew sitting at the tax booth, and he said to him, follow me. And he rose and followed him. And as Jesus reclined at the table in the house, behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and were reclining with Jesus and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? But when he heard it, he said, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. For I came not to call the righteous, but sinners. May God bless the reading of his word. Amen. So the first thing I want us to get down and understand is that Matthew was a pretty unliked person. Okay? I would also title this part of the message, Dr. Pharisee sees us for who we were. So I want us to understand who Matthew was when Jesus called out to him. See, tax collectors were at the bottom of the heap in society. And so we here in America don't have much of this societal structure. We do in some cases, depending upon where you live. In other countries, it's much more pronounced than it is here. But in this culture, tax collectors were of the lowest social stratus, though they were below prostitutes. That is how low that tax collectors were, and there's a good reason for it. See, tax collectors were Jewish people, Jewish nationals, who worked for the occupation government of Rome. So here they were, they're Jewish citizens who worked for the occupation government, so most people viewed them first off as traitors, right? And then second off, because they weren't treated very well and because they were greedy and selfish and whatever, tax collectors not only went in and collected the taxes, they collected a little bit extra for themselves as well too. So they were thieves. So not only were they traitors or viewed that way, they were also viewed as thieves. They were barred from synagogues and from public places. And really the only friends that they had in that kind of society were other tax collectors. That's who they could hang out with. So you want to know why Jesus is hanging out with tax collectors and sinners? Because that's the only people that Matthew can hang out with. This is who he was around and who he could be with. This is how society and the church viewed a man like Matthew. So I want us to understand that this is how not just Jewish society viewed Matthew. This is how the Pharisees, the churchy people of the time, also viewed Matthew this way. And they treated him as such. So some of you may understand what medical triage is. You guys familiar with that concept, triage? So medical triage is basically, it's when there's a disastrous situation and there's a lot of people who require medical care and there's not enough resources in order to provide the best level of care for everybody. There have to be decisions that are made as to who is paid attention to and who isn't, right? So if you got a boo-boo on your forehead, they don't treat you when it's a triage situation. They let you go because you're going to be okay. It's just a boo-boo. You can have your mommy kiss it. It'll get all better. Okay? Now, if you are just massively bleeding and if they spend more than 5 seconds on you, it's not going to make a difference. They also don't treat you, and they let you die because the use of the resources isn't going to make a difference in that case. And so they look and they see, where does my attention have to be placed in order to make the most value of what's going on? So that's what medical triage is. What I would suggest is that just like Dr. Pharisee in this situation, who's trying to view Matthew in a certain lens, so he is making a theological triage. So what he is doing is he's looking at Matthew and his condition in life. He's saying, it doesn't make any sense for me to spend any time here because this guy's lost. There's no hope for him. He's at the lowest run of the ladder. He is a traitor. He is a thief. And all he does is hang around with traitors and thieves. And so we can't spend any time with him. He's done. He makes that triage judgment in his mind because of his churchy values. We do triage on others too, just like Dr. Pharisee does. We treat them as if they're unworthy and not able to be saved. And so what I want us to be warned about today is that just like Dr. Pharisee when he makes his diagnosis of Matthew, we make diagnoses on other people too. And I guarantee you can think at some point in your life where someone has made a diagnosis of you. They have told you what you are, or what you were maybe, and you believe them, and you still believe them. Because that's how it works with the doctor's diagnosis, doesn't it too? When the doctor comes in and says your condition is gravely ill, you don't walk out of the doctor's office rejoicing. You believe that that's gospel truth. And you start planning like your life is over. So thankfully, Jesus saw Matthew in another way. Or Dr. Jesus sees us for who we will become, not who we were. What I know from my nature and from having children is that there's always something to complain about. Okay? It doesn't take very long before my kids will start speaking the truth and telling it like it is about the situation that they're in and about how horrible they believe it to be. So they will tell you how much they think that this is boring, or it stinks, or they don't like it. And I do that too. I just don't say it out loud anymore. But I still do, right? We all do. There's something that we look at and we complain at others because it's easier to see other people's faults than it is to see the good things that are going on in their life. It's our nature. We don't have to look hard to do it. So here's Dr. Jesus, who is in this problem with Matthew. And so Dr. Pharisee has given Matthew a diagnosis of unworthy. There's no point in spending any time with you. And luckily, Matthew goes to Dr. Jesus for a second opinion. And so Dr. Jesus takes a look, and he sees not the faults in Matthew's life, but rather he sees the evidences of God's grace in Matthew's life. He sees how God is working and will continue to work in Matthew's life. He gives a prognosis of hope instead of one of doom and failure. It's really easy to be critical, but it's much harder to see how God is working in someone's life and to praise him for it. I know this because there are people I don't like. I won't say hate, but there are people I don't like. They're annoying. I don't like to spend time with them. They drain me. And so it is so easy to look at them and to say, your life's messed up because of this and that and the other, and I'm so tired of hearing about it and what's going on. But here's the thing. God is working in their life. He's doing it. There is something that is going on in their life that God is trying to show me and others and themselves. That I didn't have it all together at one point in time, and God is working on me too. My wife prays that God continues to work on me. So we all know people who aren't what they used to be, right? I hope so. If you're a Christian and you've been around, I hope you know people that you knew 10 years ago that are not the same person today that they were 10 years ago. You want to know why? Because God is working in them. That because Jesus has left us a promise that one of them is that if we place our faith in him, that today isn't the end of the road. He promises that he will make us more like him. That's a big promise. And guess what? He delivers. It's hard for us to see that sometimes when we spend so much close time with other people. So sometimes it's tough with those that you love to see that evidence of grace. But when God gives you some time and distance with that person, to see the person that you remember and to see the person that is today, man, what a world of difference. Thank God that he is faithful to that promise. And so Dr. Jesus' prescription is believe in me. I'll make you like myself. I will do that for you. And Dr. Pharisee's prognosis is death. You might as well give up because there's nothing left. So if we have Jesus, we shouldn't be like what we used to be. Jesus didn't see the same thing that others saw. And I can just say, thankfully, that I'm not who I was 5 years ago. Jesus saw who Matthew would become, not who he was. Dr. Pharisee saw who Matthew was, a tax collector, a traitor, a sinner, a thief. He made his diagnosis. That was over. Dr. Jesus sees Matthew for who he will become, a disciple and a leader in his church. What a transformation. What a different type of character. So why would Matthew follow Jesus? And why should we? Matthew was lonely, but he was rich. And most folks would make that trade, at least at first, right? So I think, I don't remember what it was. I was talking to you about, Shay, but I said something like, I've been this, but I've not been rich, so maybe I'll try that out for a while and see what it's like. But most of us might make that trade at first. We might say, I really don't like to hang out with anybody anyway. So just make me rich. That sounds fantastic. And that's exactly where Matthew was, right? He was lonely, but rich. So why would Matthew follow Jesus? Why should we? First, we need a leader. We lack direction. Jesus spoke authoritatively into the life of Matthew and to the Pharisees and to us. So I want us to understand that Jesus' message wasn't just for Matthew, it was for everybody who was listening. And he was trying to teach Dr. Pharisee what it's like to become a good doctor, have good bedside manner. Secondly, we need a friend. Jesus went into Matthew's home. That's a big deal. It still is today, isn't it? When someone invites you to your house, that's a pretty big deal. It's not as communal as it used to be before. We've made our homes into fortresses. And so when someone invites you into that place, that's a big deal. And so Matthew needed a friend, and Jesus came to his house. That's a big deal. And not just that, he hung out with Matthew's other friends, didn't he? Wow. Next, we need a doctor, because we're all desperately sick. And while some were judging Matthew, Jesus was healing him. And then lastly, we need mercy, so desperately. Jesus, in his diagnosis, addressed the root problem of sin. He didn't offer like a 12-step plan for you to get better. He didn't say do this, 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 and this, and you're going to become a better person. Jesus simply offered forgiveness for the sins that Matthew had committed, and an offer to follow him, to become more like him. In the movie The Sixth Sense, there's a famous line in it, because it's about a little boy who can see spirits, right? I don't know if you've ever seen it or whatever. And his line is, "I see dead people." And he whispers it, and it's been made fun of in lots of other different movies and those kinds of stuff. Here's the thing I'm realizing is that Jesus saw dead people too. That Dr. Pharisee's diagnosis of Matthew was correct if Jesus wasn't going to intervene in his life. That he indeed was dead and would have been dead. But Jesus, when he sees dead people, sinful people, instead of reacting with horror to their sinful behavior, he acts with mercy. So I want us to understand that. That's been one of the biggest lessons in my life, is to understand that I listen to more sins go on in the context of my Christian community than I do outside of it. That there's good and bad in that. That people are open and free to confessing their sin to God and to each other so that they can be held accountable. But that they're also here, that they feel safe to do it. And I've tried to learn how to react without horror to that. To expect that people do sinful things sometimes. To all sorts of varying different degrees. And so we act shocked that people who don't know Jesus would act sinfully. There's a difference between people who know Jesus and people who don't. Forgiveness, hope, and the opportunity to get better. That's not available for people who don't know Jesus. And so we have this complex, I think, inside the church sometimes of where we expect sinners to act like saints. The invisible rule book, right? We expect them to come here for this hour and behave. And guess what? Even the worst person can behave for an hour. They can do it. But what about the rest of the week? And we also have this expectation, and we allow it to happen, that saints act like sinners. And we put up with it. And it really should be a little flippant, shouldn't it? The Pharisees were committed churchgoers. But churchiness will never impress the Lord. You see, when Jesus talked about sacrifice, he's referring to their religious traditions and ceremonies. And so if I were going to make the John Pethel semi-heretical paraphrase of our passage today of verse 13, I would say that it would sound more like this. Until you can look at all people with mercy and compassion, your church attendance and worship are meaningless to me. In other words, Jesus was saying that sick people need treatment, not tradition. If you've ever been to the hospital, and it's been a while since my last stay overnight in the hospital, but I remember it fairly well. You know that you're going to be constantly interrupted for treatments. You have, by the way, they always tell you, hey, lay down and get some rest. Yeah. And you look forward to that, right? And you're laying down and getting rest. But sure enough, you've just drifted off to sleep, and the lights blare on, and some nurse wants to test this, or get you to swallow that, or sit you up, or stick you with something. That's not very restful for me. And they want to do it like every 3 hours. So try sleeping like 2 hours at a time. It's not enjoyable. But imagine a hospital where they just go through the motions. Imagine a hospital where they just turn the lights on and wake you up 3 times a night without fail. And you ask why they keep waking you up, but you just say, hey, here at the hospital, it's our tradition. Wake you up 3 times a night. We've done it that way for so long that no one actually remembers why we do it. And they don't do anything for you. They don't treat you. They just give you the hospital tradition. That's the way church can become if we're not careful. We sit and stand and sing and bow our heads. We smile and greet and say amen at all the proper times. But no one remembers why we do it. It's just the way that we do church. Actually, it's possible, I think, for church to become its own God, worshiping in its own ways, refusing to make any changes, or even to examine why it does what it does. The sad truth is that the church is being perceived as irrelevant to the lives of many Americans. To some, it seems that the church is living in the past rather than reaching out to the realities of the present. It's more like instead of they'll know we are Christians by our, it's more like they'll know we are Christians by our clothes, by our songs, rather than by our love. Church attendance is declining. So I don't know about here, but regular attendance and I've talked with some of my other Colorado pastor friends, regular attendance at our church is maybe twice a month. And so every week I preach to a different group of people. Because church attendance is declining. It's not valued or perceived as important or a necessary thing. So on average, what I could tell you is that here in the Tri-Cities micropolitan statistical area, so say that 5 times fast, that there are roughly 500,000 people. In the United States, on average, only 20% are in church on any given weekend. So that's 100,000 people out of 500,000. So what that means is that there are 400,000 people here in this area who don't attend a worship service on the weekend. Don't think that the South is oversaturated with the gospel or with churches. It's not. The gospel's needed right here. Not just to get them to come to church. Don't hear that. But that the fact that they don't believe that the bride of Christ is important at all, that's a big deal. Because it sure is important to Jesus. And if they love Jesus, they'll love his bride too. And guess what? It's not perfect. So I would read the thing of, if you find a perfect church, there isn't one. Yeah, there isn't one. So who will you call to help your church? Will you go to the office of Dr. Pharisee and be treated poorly, always thinking about what you can't do and who you can't reach? Or will you have a house call from Dr. Jesus and begin to see yourselves and each other with the same grace that Jesus does? Our need isn't the self-righteousness and judgment of the Pharisees, but the mercy and grace of Jesus Christ. The mission's not to get people to attend church, but to get them to hear, to believe, and to live out the gospel. Amen. So is the church going to become a hospital who desires to see it become messy with the glorious problems of Jesus transforming lives from sin to holiness? Because that's what it should look. There should be problems here. There really should. In any church, there should be lots of problems to deal with, because people should be constantly being transformed from sinfulness to holiness. And that's a long process. That's a lifetime process, not an overnight change. And when that happens, it makes a mess. And sometimes it's hard to put up with it. So are we going to be Pharisees in the lives of others? Or are we going to be physicians like Jesus Christ? So we can speak either words of life or words of death. How are you going to view people? Who they are? Or who God will make them? Let's pray. God, I want you to break our hearts for what breaks yours. Lord, help us to rid ourselves of self-righteousness and judgment. It's insipid and it creeps in. Lord, it's there and I hate it in myself. Lord, would you please help me to desire mercy more than sacrifice? Would you help us to deliver mercy and grace and forgiveness as you've delivered it to us? Lord, would you help us to see our own identity and the identity of others through the lens of the grace of God that is working in our lives? Lord, I do not want to be Dr. Pharisee. Help me to see people like Dr. Jesus does. Thank you that he can take a life like Matthew's and transform it. Help us to be a friend of sinners as well. We can only do that through your power, through your mercy, and through your grace. Amen.